The fluorescent bulbs surrounding the mirror cast Reba McEntire's reflection in unforgiving clarity. Every line earned from 4 decades in the spotlight, every strand of auburn hair meticulously styled by her team, every sequin on her crimson dress, it all stared back at her with the weight of history. The Grand Ole Opry's backstage area hummed with the controlled chaos that preceded any major performance. But inside Dressing Room 7, the legendary space that had hosted everyone from Patsy Cline to Dolly Parton, there existed an island of temporary stillness. Reba's hands moved mechanically through the pre-show ritual, adjusting the microphone pack at her waist, checking the in-ear monitors, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from fabric that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her manager, Linda, had left moments ago with final confirmations. The governor would be in attendance, CMT was streaming live, and ticket sales had broken venue records. 40 years in the business deserved celebration, and Nashville had shown up to deliver it. The knock came soft, almost apologetic. "Ms. McEntire." The voice belonged to Jeremy, one of the venue's stage assistants, barely 23, and still wide-eyed about working at the Opry. "Sorry to interrupt, but someone asked me to deliver this directly to you. Said it was urgent but private." Reba turned from the mirror, her professional smile already in place. "Come on in, honey." Jeremy stepped inside, holding a cream-colored envelope like it might detonate. The paper quality was expensive. She could tell even from across the room. Her name was written across the front in elegant cursive, the kind taught in Southern private schools decades ago, when penmanship still mattered. "Who's it from?" she asked, though something in her chest had already begun tightening. "The lady didn't give a name, ma'am, just said you'd know." Jeremy extended the envelope, his role complete. "Said to make sure you got it before the show." Reba took it, the paper cool against her fingers. "Thank you, Jeremy. You can head back now." The door clicked shut with a finality that seemed disproportionate to the moment. Reba stood there, the envelope in her hands, and realized she was afraid to turn it over. Afraid to see the return address. Or worse, the absence of one. The handwriting tugged at memory. Refined loops and careful spacing that spoke of another era, another version of the music industry where artists still wrote thank you notes by hand and phone calls meant something. She flipped the envelope. No return address, just a small notation in the bottom left corner, almost hidden in the cream-on-cream color scheme. T.Y. Trisha Yearwood. The name landed in her consciousness like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through 15 years of careful emotional distance. Reba lowered herself into the chair before her knees could make the decision for her. The last time she'd received anything personal from Trisha had been 2003, a generic Christmas card with a printed signature, the kind sent to industry acquaintances rather than friends. They'd been friends once, real friends, not the manufactured kind that Nashville produced for photo opportunities and award show collaborations. Back in the early 90s, when Trisha was fighting for recognition and Reba was navigating the transition from country traditionalist to crossover sensation, they'd found genuine connection. Late-night phone calls dissecting record label politics, shopping trips to vintage stores in East Nashville before it became trendy. Shared disappointment over radio programmers who thought women couldn't carry country music the way men could. Then 2003 happened, and everything changed. Reba had never known exactly what caused the shift. Trisha had simply pulled away. Phone calls went unreturned. Invitations declined. The warmth that had defined their friendship cooled into professional courtesy, the kind of polite distance that Nashville perfected into an art form. Reba had tried initially. Sent messages asking if everything was okay, suggested coffee meetings that never materialized. Eventually, pride and busy schedules made it easier to let the friendship die quietly rather than demand answers. Now, 15 years later, on one of the most important nights of Reba's career, Trisha Yearwood had sent a letter. Her fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal. The paper inside matched the envelope. Thick, expensive, chosen deliberately. 2 pages, covered in the same careful handwriting. Reba's eyes caught the opening line before she'd consciously decided to read. Dear Reba, I've started this letter 47 times over the past 6 months. Each time, I told myself I didn't owe you the truth, that some secrets protect everyone involved. That confession is selfish, unburdening the guilty while forcing the innocent to carry new weight. But tonight, watching you prepare for your celebration, I realized the real selfishness is keeping silent. Somewhere beyond the dressing room door, the Opry House Orchestra began their pre-show warm-up. The familiar strains of Will the Circle Be Unbroken drifted through the walls, a standard they played before every show, a Nashville tradition as dependable as summer humidity. Reba barely heard it. Her attention had narrowed to the words on the page, to the confession beginning to unfold in Trisha Yearwood's careful script. In March of 2003, you were offered the lead role in The Road Home, the film about a country singer navigating grief and redemption. I know because your agent, Michael Harding, called mine to discuss the project. What you never knew was that I had been offered the same role 2 weeks earlier and turned it down. Not because I didn't want it. I wanted it desperately. But the timing seemed wrong. I was afraid of failure, and I let fear win. Reba's breathing had gone shallow. She remembered The Road Home, remembered the excitement when Michael first mentioned it, how she'd cleared her schedule for potential filming dates, how she'd even started vocal training for the specific style of songs the movie required. Then, without explanation, the offer had evaporated. Michael said the producers had gone in a different direction. She'd never questioned it further. Disappointments were part of the business, and she'd learned early not to dwell on opportunities that didn't materialize. When I heard they'd offered it to you, something broke inside me. Not jealousy exactly. Something worse, regret mixed with panic. I'd just come off my second album's disappointing sales. My marriage to Robert was falling apart in ways I couldn't admit publicly. I was taking pills to sleep and different pills to wake up, and in between I was terrified that I'd made the biggest mistake of my career by turning down a role that could have changed everything. The orchestra had finished their warm-up. In 10 minutes, Reba was supposed to be in position for her entrance. The stage manager would knock soon, voice cheerful and efficient, ready to guide her to the moment she'd been preparing for all week. But she couldn't move. Couldn't stop reading. So I called the producer, Marcus Chen, told him you weren't right for the part, that your schedule was more complicated than they realized, that you were difficult to work with on set, that there had been issues on your sitcom that weren't public knowledge. I lied, Reba. I lied deliberately and thoroughly, and I did it knowing exactly what I was taking from you. The paper crinkled in Reba's grip, her hands having curled into fists without conscious instruction. The words on the page blurred slightly, then refocused with sharp clarity. The movie went to Sandra Perkins instead, and you know what happened. It became a sleeper hit, won awards, launched Sandra into dramatic roles that transformed her career. Every time I saw her at industry events after that, collecting accolades for a role I'd sabotaged for you, I felt the weight of what I'd done. But I told myself it was survival, that the music industry demands impossible choices, that you'd never know, so the harm was contained. A knock on the door, sharp, professional. Ms. McEntire, 5 minutes to places. Reba's voice emerged hoarse, unfamiliar. I need another few minutes. Ma'am, the show starts in... I said I need a few minutes. The steel in her tone, honed through decades of fighting for respect in rooms full of men who underestimated her, left no room for argument. Silence. Then, yes, ma'am. I'll let them know. Footsteps retreated. Reba returned to the letter, to Trisha's confession continuing its methodical devastation. I could offer explanations. Tell you about the prescription medication dependency I was hiding, about Robert's affairs that I pretended not to notice, about the panic attacks that left me sobbing in bathroom stalls before performances. I could describe the specific desperation of being 38 years old in an industry that worships 25, watching younger artists claim the spotlight while my singles barely cracked the top 20. But none of that excuses what I did to you. Reba's mind was racing, pulling up memories from 2003 and examining them with new context. The CMA Awards that September, when she'd run into Trisha backstage. The conversation had been stilted, formal, and Reba had attributed it to busy schedules and the natural drift of industry friendships. Now she saw it differently. Trisha's averted eyes, the quick escape to the restroom, the way she'd positioned herself on the opposite side of venues at subsequent events. The worst part isn't that I sabotaged your opportunity, it's that I let you believe our friendship ended for no reason. I pulled away because I couldn't look at you without seeing my own betrayal reflected back. Every time you smiled at me with genuine warmth, not knowing what I'd done, it was a reminder of how thoroughly I'd failed the person who'd shown me nothing but support and kindness. The letter's second page revealed Trisha's handwriting growing less controlled, the careful loops beginning to slant and compress. I met Garth 2 years after this happened. He helped me get clean, helped me rebuild my sense of self, helped me remember why I loved music in the first place. Our marriage saved my life in ways I'm still discovering. But even that happiness is shadowed by what I did to you. Garth knows the whole story. I told him before we got engaged because I couldn't build a life on more secrets. He encouraged me to tell you years ago, but I was too much of a coward. Reba thought about Garth Brooks, about the few times she'd interacted with him at industry events in recent years. He'd always been gracious, professional, but there'd been something in his eyes when he looked at her. Not pity exactly, but a kind of careful assessment. Now she understood. He'd known, had probably wondered when his wife would finally do the right thing. I'm writing this now because last month I watched an interview you did with Country Weekly. The journalist asked if you had regrets about your career choices, and you mentioned turning down film opportunities because the timing never seemed right. You said it so casually, like it was just one of those things. But I knew the truth. And I realized that my silence had become another form of theft. Stealing your right to know why certain doors closed, stealing your ability to make sense of your own history. The final paragraph was separated from the rest by extra spacing, as if Trisha had stopped writing and then returned later to finish. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve the relief that comes from confession, but you deserve the truth, even if it comes 15 years late and changes nothing about the past. I'm writing this on the night of your celebration, because you should know as you stand on that stage, accepting recognition for 4 decades of excellence, that you achieved everything despite unfair obstacles, including obstacles I created. Your success is entirely your own, earned through talent and resilience that someone tried to undermine. I'm deeply sorry for being that someone. Whatever you decide to do with this information, whether you confront me publicly, privately, or not at all, I'll accept as exactly what I've earned, with more regret than I can articulate, Trisha. Reba set the letter down on the dressing table with exaggerated care, as if sudden movement might cause it to combust. Her reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, same red dress, same styled hair, but the eyes had changed. They held knowledge now that hadn't existed 10 minutes ago, and the weight of it was physically visible in the tightness around her mouth, the rigid set of her shoulders. 15 years. 15 years of professional distance, of wondering what she'd done wrong, of occasionally Googling Trisha's name at 2 a.m. and analyzing photos for clues to their friendship's demise. 15 years of carefully neutral responses when journalists asked about other female artists, of avoiding Trisha's music because it carried too many memories, of building walls that she'd convinced herself were about self-protection when really they were about unprocessed grief. And it had all been based on a lie. On Trisha Yearwood's moment of desperate self-preservation that had cost Reba an opportunity she'd never even known she'd truly lost. The anger arrived suddenly, a flash flood of emotion that left her trembling. She wanted to throw something, wanted to scream, wanted to storm out to find Trisha and demand answers to questions the letter hadn't addressed. How dare she write this now, minutes before Reba was supposed to celebrate 4 decades of achievement? How dare she unburden herself on this particular night, stealing focus from what should have been pure joy? But underneath the anger lurked something more complex, a reluctant understanding of the specific hell Trisha must have inhabited for 15 years. Reba knew addiction, had seen it destroy artists she'd admired, knew the pressure of aging in an industry obsessed with youth, had felt the terror of relevance slipping away despite talent that hadn't diminished, knew the suffocating weight of secrets, the way they calcified around your ribs and made every breath hurt. The knock came again, more urgent. "Ms. McEntire, I'm really sorry, but we need you at stage entrance. The audience is seated," and Reba stood, her body moving on autopilot, while her mind remained stuck in the revelation still spreading through her consciousness like cracks in ice. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, then slid it into her purse, the designer bag that sat next to the flowers sent by her children, the good luck cards from fellow artists, the bottle of champagne chilling for the after-party. She walked to the door and opened it to find Jeremy and the stage manager both looking anxious. "I'm ready," she said, and her voice held steady despite everything. The walk to stage entrance blurred into familiar routine, hallways covered in photographs of Opry legends, the smell of aging wood and fresh paint, the distant roar of an audience hungry for entertainment. But Reba felt disconnected from all of it, watching herself move through space like a character in someone else's story. They reached the wings, where she could see the stage lights warming up, could hear the announcer beginning his introduction. "Ladies and gentlemen, celebrating 40 years of country music excellence, a voice that defined generations and broke every barrier in her path. Please welcome to the Grand Ole Opry stage, the incomparable Reba McEntire." The applause hit like a physical wave. Reba took a breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped into the light. The audience rose to their feet, thousands of people she couldn't clearly see past the stage lights, all celebrating a career built on perseverance and talent, and sheer stubborn refusal to be dismissed. And somewhere in Nashville, possibly watching this moment on a screen, Trisha Yearwood was waiting to see what happened next. The spotlight was absolute, the kind of white-hot illumination that erased everything beyond its circle. Reba found her mark on the familiar wooden floor of the Opry stage, the same boards that had supported her at 24 when she was still proving herself, still fighting radio programmers who thought her voice was too traditional, too Oklahoma, too female for the mainstream country market. The band struck the opening chords of Fancy, an obvious choice, the song that had defined her crossover success in 1991. But tonight it felt different. The lyrics about a girl from the Oklahoma hills using the only weapons available to escape poverty and build a life on her own terms suddenly carried new weight. I might have been born just plain white trash, but Fancy was my name. Every word about survival and transformation felt pointed, deliberate, as if the song had been waiting for this particular performance to reveal its full meaning. Reba delivered the vocals with precision that came from decades of muscle memory, hitting every note while her mind spun through calculations. Trisha was probably watching. Garth Brooks was probably watching. The entire Nashville establishment that had witnessed their friendship's unexplained death was probably watching. And none of them knew that backstage in dressing room 7, Everything had changed. The applause between songs gave her moments to breathe, to recalibrate. Her band was flawless. They'd been touring together for years and could read her moods with the accuracy of meteorologists tracking storm systems. Her guitarist Marcus caught her eye during a transition and flashed a subtle thumbs up. He'd noticed something off in her energy, but was trusting her to handle it. That was the gift of working with professionals. They gave you space to be human. "Thank you," Reba said into the microphone, her speaking voice warm and practiced. "Thank you so much. 40 years in this business teaches you things, teaches you about resilience, about choosing yourself, even when that choice is terrifying, about the difference between success and fulfillment, between being busy and being purposeful." She hadn't planned to say any of this. Her team had prepared remarks, light, entertaining, full of anecdotes about early career mishaps and heartfelt thanks to supporters. But Trisha's letter had rewritten the script, and Reba found herself speaking from a rawer place than she'd intended. "I've made peace with a lot of things over the years," she continued, and the audience had gone quiet, sensing the shift from performance to something more vulnerable. "Made peace with the fact that not everyone who smiles at you means you well. That this industry can be brutal to women, especially women who refuse to age quietly or step aside when younger models come along. That sometimes your real accomplishment isn't the awards or the sales numbers. It's surviving with your integrity mostly intact." The Grand Ole Opry's acoustics were legendary, designed to carry every nuance of voice throughout the historic space. Reba could feel her words reaching the upper balconies, the box seats where industry executives and politicians sat, the standing room only section filled with fans who'd driven hours for this show. "But I've also learned," she said, her voice dropping to something more intimate, "that the hardest truths are the ones we tell ourselves. The stories we construct to explain why things happened the way they did, why certain friendships ended, why certain opportunities evaporated, why certain people pulled away, and we decided it was probably our fault somehow." In the front row, she could make out faces now. Her manager, Linda, looked concerned, leaning forward slightly, as if preparing to intervene if this went somewhere problematic. Reba gave her the smallest shake of her head. "Not yet. Let me work through this." "Tonight, I learned something," Reba continued, and the theater was so quiet she could hear the air conditioning system humming. "I learned that sometimes the narrative we've been telling ourselves is incomplete. That there are chapters we didn't know existed, written by other people's fears and desperation and very human mistakes." She could stop here, could transition into another song, wrap up the show with professionalism and grace, process Trisha's confession privately like a reasonable adult. But 15 years of confusion and hurt was demanding acknowledgement, and Reba had spent 4 decades being told what she should and shouldn't say in public. Tonight, in this space that had witnessed country music's evolution through triumph and tragedy, she decided honesty mattered more than protection. "I'm not going to name names," she said clearly, "because that's not the point. But I want to say something to anyone out there carrying guilt about choices they made when they were struggling, when they were scared, when they were just trying to survive in an industry that doesn't forgive weakness. I see you. I understand the impossible positions we're put in, especially as women trying to maintain careers in a system designed to replace us every 5 years." The applause started tentatively, then built like a wave-gathering force. Women throughout the audience responded viscerally. They knew. They understood the specific exhaustion of fighting for space in rooms that didn't want them there, of being pitted against each other while men failed upward without consequence. Reba let the applause settle before continuing. "But I also want to say this. Confession without accountability is just therapy you're making other people pay for. If you've hurt someone, telling the truth is step 1. Step 2 is accepting whatever comes next, including their anger, their disappointment, their complete rejection of your apology. You don't get to unburden yourself and then demand immediate forgiveness. Healing doesn't work on your timeline. The theater had gone quiet again, everyone processing the subtext of her words. Country music thrived on gossip and speculation. By tomorrow morning, Nashville would be buzzing with theories about who had wronged Reba McEntire and whether this was a prelude to public drama. Let them speculate, she thought. The truth was between her and Trisha, and whatever came next would be handled privately, away from cameras and TMZ headlines and fans picking sides. "Now," Reba said, her voice lightening as she signaled the band, "I'm going to sing a song I haven't performed in about 15 years. Some of you might remember it from the '94 album, Read My Mind. It's called Why Haven't I Heard From You? And tonight it feels particularly appropriate." The audience laughed, recognizing the title's resonance with everything she'd just said. The band launched into the upbeat melody, and Reba delivered the lyrics about waiting for communication that never comes, about the confusion of silence, about finally demanding answers. Every line felt deliberately chosen by fate, as if she'd been preparing for this exact moment without knowing it. She could lose herself in performance, always had been able to. It was a survival skill developed early, the ability to partition emotion, to keep personal turmoil separate from professional execution. But tonight, the partition was porous. As she sang about waiting by phones that didn't ring and wondering if she'd done something wrong, images from 2003 kept surfacing. Trisha, at the CMA Awards looking haunted, Trisha's Christmas card with its impersonal message, Trisha's smile in magazine photos next to Garth Brooks, looking like someone who'd found safety but couldn't quite access joy. The song ended to thunderous applause. Reba transitioned into The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia, another narrative-driven piece about secrets and consequences. The setlist her team had planned was chronological, tracking her career's evolution, but now it felt like a psychological profile, each song revealing some truth about who she'd been and who she'd become. An hour into the performance, during a quiet moment with just her and an acoustic guitar player, Reba spoke again. "I want to talk about forgiveness for a minute," she said, and the audience settled into rapt attention. Not the easy kind, not the kind where someone says sorry and you immediately hug and pretend nothing happened. I'm talking about the hard kind. The kind where you have to sit with anger and betrayal and decide whether understanding someone's pain excuses the harm they caused. She strummed a few chords on the guitar they'd brought out. She wasn't as skilled as her band members, but she could handle basic progressions. "I don't have answers tonight. I'm working through something in real time here, and I appreciate y'all bearing with me. But I think maybe forgiveness isn't about absolving the other person. Maybe it's about refusing to let their choices continue defining your story, about taking your power back." The next song was Is There Life Out There? About a woman who'd built a life according to everyone else's expectations and finally dared to ask if there was more. Reba had sung it thousands of times, but tonight every lyric about reclaiming identity and pursuing delayed dreams felt revolutionary. By the show's final third, Reba had found a strange equilibrium. The initial shock of Trisha's letter had metabolized into something more complex. Anger still present, but joined by curiosity, hurt tempered by reluctant empathy. She thought about Trisha writing that confession 47 times, struggling to find words adequate to the magnitude of betrayal. Thought about Trisha watching tonight's broadcast, possibly with Garth beside her, waiting for Reba's response to land like a verdict. For the encore, Reba chose Consider Me Gone, a song about walking away from situations that no longer serve you, about choosing self-respect over comfort. As she delivered the final chorus, looking out at thousands of faces singing along, she realized something crucial. Trisha's confession had given her information, but what she did with that information was entirely her choice. She could let it poison the celebration, could use it as ammunition for revenge, could let bitterness take root and ruin her achievement. Or she could acknowledge the complexity of human failure, the reality that good people make terrible choices under pressure, and decide for herself what forgiveness looked like, not for Trisha's benefit, but for her own. The applause as she took her final bow was deafening. Reba stood center stage, arms raised in gratitude, and felt the familiar rush of having connected with an audience, of having transformed personal pain into communal catharsis. Whatever happened next with Trisha, whatever conversations they would or wouldn't have, tonight she'd honored both her success and the messy reality of how careers were built in Nashville's complicated ecosystem. Backstage, Linda was waiting with concern etched across her face. "Reba, what was that about? The stuff about accountability and forgiveness. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Reba said, and meant it more than she'd expected. "Actually, I'm better than fine. I just got some clarity I've needed for a long time." She returned to dressing room 7, where Trisha's letter still sat in her purse, its presence somehow both lighter and heavier than before. Reba pulled out her phone. She'd silenced it before the show, and now it displayed 43 notifications. Text messages from friends who'd watched the broadcast, industry contacts wondering if everything was all right, and one message that stood out from the others. From Trisha Yearwood. Time, 10:47 p.m. Message, "I watched. I understand if you never want to speak to me again. But if you do, I'm home tomorrow afternoon. No cameras, no managers, just us. You deserve that option. T." Reba stared at the message for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. She could ignore it, let silence be her answer. Could respond with anger, with demands, with all the hurt that 15 years of confusion had generated. Could send a carefully worded text that maintained professional distance while acknowledging receipt of Trisha's confession. Instead, she typed, "I'll be there at 2 p.m, come alone." She hit send before she could reconsider, then set the phone down and began removing the stage makeup that felt like armor she no longer needed. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Tonight, she'd survived the revelation, transformed it into art, and claimed her celebration despite the complication Trisha's letter had introduced. And that, Reba thought as she wiped foundation from skin that looked older and more honest without it, was its own kind of triumph. Reba woke at 6:30 a.m. despite going to bed past 2. Her body was programmed for early rising after decades of radio interviews, morning shows, and the relentless schedule that sustained a country music career. Sunlight filtered through the curtains of her Nashville home, an estate in the city's prestigious Belmead neighborhood that she'd purchased in 1995, back when her sitcom was reaching its commercial peak and diversifying income streams seemed smart rather than mercenary. She lay there for several minutes, staring at the ceiling's crown molding, letting the previous night's events reassemble themselves from the fragmented state of half-sleep. Trisha's letter, the performance, the text message exchange, the 2 p.m. meeting that was now less than 8 hours away. Her phone showed 73 new notifications. Country music blogs had already picked up on her comments during the show, with headlines speculating about mystery feuds and unnamed betrayals. Reba McEntire drops hints about past hurt during anniversary concert. Is there trouble in country music paradise? Reba's cryptic comments spark speculation. None of them had connected the dots to Trisha yet. Nashville ran on gossip, but it also understood the value of plausible deniability. Reba scrolled through messages from friends asking if she was okay, from her publicist requesting clarification about whether they needed to prepare a statement, from her children checking in with the casual concern of adults who'd learned to give their mother space while remaining available. She responded to none of them yet. Coffee first, clarity second, communication third. The kitchen of her home was a professional-grade space she rarely used. Touring meant eating on buses and in hotel restaurants, and her few days home usually involved takeout from Nashville institutions she'd been patronizing for decades. But this morning felt different, required ritual. She made coffee the old-fashioned way, measuring grounds and water with precision her assistant would have found amusing, given how rarely Reba operated her own appliances. While the coffee brewed, she retrieved Trisha's letter from her purse and read it again in morning light. The words hadn't changed, but their impact had shifted slightly. Last night they'd felt like an ambush. This morning they read more like a confession, extracted under duress from Trisha's own conscience. The handwriting in the final paragraph showed stress. Letters cramped together, the elegant cursive breaking down into something more urgent. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve the relief that comes from confession. That line snagged Reba's attention in a way it hadn't the first time. Trisha was right. Confession was selfish, transferring burden from the guilty to the innocent. But it was also the only path toward any kind of resolution, messy and insufficient as that resolution might be. Reba thought about all the times she'd carried secrets, about the weight of information that couldn't be shared without destroying relationships or reputations. She understood, perhaps more than she wanted to, why Trisha had waited 15 years to speak. The coffee finished brewing. Reba poured a cup and carried it to her home office, a room lined with awards that represented 4 decades of achievement. Gold records, platinum certifications, Grammys, ACM awards, CMA trophies. All the external validation that was supposed to prove you'd made it, that you mattered, that the sacrifices had been worth it. Her eyes landed on the 2003 Female Vocalist of the Year award from the Academy of Country Music. She'd won it the same year The Road Home would have been filming had she gotten the role. Would that award have felt different if she'd also been building a film career? Would she have been happier, more fulfilled? Or would Hollywood have been its own kind of cage, trading one set of limitations for another? Reba pulled out her laptop and did something she'd avoided for 15 years. She looked up The Road Home and watched the trailer. The film appeared on her screen. Sandra Perkins, in her award-winning role, playing a fading country star who returns to her small Oklahoma hometown after her mother's death and confronts everything she'd run from to build her career. The parallels to Reba's own story were obvious. Girl from Oklahoma, check. Complex relationship with family and roots, check. Music industry struggles disguised as plot points, check. No wonder Marcus Chen had originally wanted her. She could have played this role in her sleep, could have brought authenticity that Sandra, talented as she was, could only approximate through research and preparation. Watching Sandra's performance, Reba felt a surprising absence of anger. The film was good, respectably made, but not the transformative masterpiece that reviews had suggested. Sandra had done well with material that suited her, but Reba could see exactly where she would have made different choices. More subtlety here, more raw emotion there, a twang in the dialogue delivery that would have grounded the character's authenticity. She closed the laptop before the trailer finished. The point wasn't to torture herself with what-ifs. The point was to understand the full scope of what Trisha had taken. Not just a role, but the choice itself. The ability to read the script, audition, decide for herself whether it was worth the risk of expanding beyond music into acting. By noon, Reba had showered, dressed in jeans and a casual blouse that suggested this meeting was between equals, rather than a formal confrontation, and was pacing her living room trying to decide what she actually wanted from the afternoon ahead. Answers, certainly. An explanation more detailed than the letter provided. But beyond that, she pulled out her phone and called her sister Alice, who lived in Oklahoma and had remained blessedly outside the Nashville bubble despite Reba's fame. "Well, look who remembers she has family," Alice answered, affection clear beneath the teasing. I need your honest opinion about something, Reba said, dispensing with pleasantries. If someone hurt you badly, but their reasons were complicated, they were struggling with things you didn't know about, made a terrible choice out of desperation rather than malice, does that change anything? Does understanding why they did it mean you have to forgive them? Alice was quiet for a moment. This about that singer friend of yours, Trisha. How did you... Reba, I watched your show last night. So did half of Oklahoma, and I've known you since you were born. I know when you're processing something big in public because you can't keep it contained privately. Reba exhaled, settling onto her couch. She sent me a letter, confessed to something she did 15 years ago that it cost me an opportunity. A big one. And she had reasons, Alice. She was struggling with addiction and a bad marriage and the terror of becoming irrelevant. But she still made a choice that hurt me, and I'm trying to figure out what to do with that information. Do you want to forgive her? I don't know. Part of me wants to stay angry. Anger is clean, you know. It's simple. She wronged me, end of story. But understanding her situation makes the anger more complicated, makes me feel like maybe I should be more compassionate than I want to be. Alice's voice came through gentle but firm. Here's what I know about forgiveness. And I learned it the hard way when Carl's brother embezzled from our business. Forgiveness isn't about the other person deserving it. It's about you deciding you're done, letting their actions control your emotional state. You can forgive someone and still set boundaries. You can understand why they did something and still acknowledge it was wrong. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. So, what do I say to her? Whatever's true, don't perform forgiveness because it makes you look magnanimous. Don't perform anger because it's what people expect. Just be honest about where you're at, even if where you're at is confused and complicated. After they hung up, Reba sat with her sister's advice, testing it against her actual feelings. She was angry. That hadn't disappeared overnight. But she was also curious about the Trisha who'd written that letter, the Trisha who'd carried guilt for 15 years and finally broken under its weight. That version of Trisha was different from the ambitious peer Reba remembered from the early 90s, different even from the distant professional she'd become accustomed to seeing at industry events. At 1:30 p.m., Reba got in her car, a Range Rover that her manager insisted was appropriate for someone of her status, but that always felt absurdly large for solo driving. She programmed Trisha's address into the GPS, a home in Franklin, Tennessee, about 30 minutes south of Nashville. Franklin was where Nashville's elite moved when they wanted space and privacy, when the Belmead estates felt too close to the city's constant industry churn. The drive took her through familiar territory, past recording studios where she'd made albums, past the Bluebird Cafe where she'd performed during lean years before her breakthrough, past billboard advertisements for current country stars who hadn't been born when she'd started out. Nashville had changed dramatically since she'd first arrived in the late 70s, transformed from a mid-sized southern city with a famous industry into a boomtown that struggled to balance growth with the authenticity that had made it special. She thought about calling her manager, preparing Linda for potential fallout if this meeting went poorly and became public. But that felt premature, like assuming drama before giving conversation a chance. Whatever happened in the next few hours, Reba wanted it to unfold without the interference of publicists and damage control specialists. Franklin appeared gradually, the dense commercial development giving way to horse farms and estates set back from the road behind privacy gates and careful landscaping. Trisha's home was in a gated community called Laurelbrook. Reba gave her name to the guard, who checked a list and waved her through without comment. Either Trisha had prepared him, or he was well trained enough not to react to celebrity names. The Yearwood Brooks estate sat at the end of a tree-lined drive, a sprawling southern colonial with white columns and black shutters that looked like it belonged in a tourism brochure for Tennessee gentility. Reba parked in the circular driveway, noting the absence of other vehicles. Trisha had honored the request to come alone. No Garth, no managers, no witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. Before Reba could reach the door, it opened. Trisha stood there in jeans and a simple sweater, her famous blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, minimal makeup revealing the lines that 49 years of living had earned her. She looked smaller than Reba remembered, diminished somehow, as if guilt had physical weight that compressed the body carrying it. "Thank you for coming," Trisha said, her voice quiet. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," Reba replied honestly. "Until I was in the car driving here, I still thought I might turn around." "But you didn't." "No, I didn't." They stood there for a moment, 15 years of distance and hurt and unspoken words creating a space between them that felt almost tangible. Then Trisha stepped back, holding the door open. "Come in. I made tea, but I also have coffee if you prefer, or something stronger if this conversation requires it." Despite everything, Reba smiled slightly at that. "Tea's fine." She stepped across the threshold into whatever came next. Trisha's home interior reflected the careful balance she'd struck between country star glamour and domestic warmth, expensive furniture arranged in ways that suggested actual living rather than designer staging, photographs of family and friends mixed with tasteful awards displays, a piano in the corner that showed signs of regular use rather than decorative placement. Through French doors, Reba could see a back patio overlooking acres of Tennessee hillside, the kind of view that cost millions but couldn't be entirely bought, requiring location and timing and the particular fortune that came with sustained success. "Garth wanted to be here," Trisha said, as she led Reba to the kitchen, a massive space with professional appliances and a large island that served as workspace and gathering place. "Not to defend me or interfere, but for moral support. I told him this needed to be just us." He understood. "Where is he?" "On his property in Oklahoma. Gave me the house for the day. He's been remarkably patient with this whole situation, more patient than I deserve." Trisha poured tea from a ceramic pot into mugs that looked handmade, the kind of artisan pottery sold at Nashville's farmers markets by people who'd moved to Tennessee to chase music dreams and ended up supporting themselves through craft. Her hands trembled slightly, liquid sloshing close to the rim, before she steadied herself. They settled at the kitchen island, tea between them like a prop in a play neither had fully rehearsed. Reba studied Trisha's face, cataloguing changes 15 years had wrought. Deeper lines around the eyes, a tightness in the jaw that suggested stress held chronically, but also something softer than the ambitious peer she remembered. This Trisha looked like someone who'd survived something, come through the other side, changed. "I don't know where to start," Trisha said finally. "The letter was supposed to explain everything, but sitting here with you, I realize how inadequate words are for what I did." "Then let's start with what the letter didn't explain," Reba said, her voice controlled. "Why now? Why wait 15 years to tell me? Why not come clean when you got sober, when you married Garth, when you rebuilt your life and supposedly found peace?" Trisha's fingers wrapped around her mug, seeking warmth or comfort or something to hold. "Because I was a coward. Because as long as you didn't know, I could pretend it hadn't happened. Could pretend our friendship had just drifted apart naturally, the way careers sometimes cause. Because telling you meant facing your anger and disappointment and knowing I'd destroyed one of the few genuine friendships I'd had in this industry. So, what changed? Last year, Garth and I did a thing at the Opry for their anniversary celebration. Backstage, I saw your dressing room, number 7, the one you always request. Someone had left flowers there for you, even though you weren't performing that night. just because it's your space and people associate it with you. And I thought about all the times I'd been in that room with you, back when we were friends. All the conversations about everything and nothing, all the laughter and commiseration and solidarity. Trisha's voice cracked slightly. And I realized I'd been carrying this secret like it was protecting me, but really, it was just rotting inside, poisoning everything good I'd built. Garth had been telling me for years that confession was the only path to real peace, but I hadn't listened. Standing there in that hallway, looking at flowers meant for you, I finally understood he was right. Reba took a sip of tea, using the gesture to buy time while she processed. The letter mentioned you told Garth before you got engaged. What did he say when you confessed? He asked me what I was going to do about it. When I said maybe nothing, that you didn't need to know, he said that was unacceptable. That building a marriage on the foundation of my unaddressed guilt would contaminate everything we tried to create together. He gave me a year to figure out how to tell you. When that year passed and I still hadn't done it, he stopped pushing but made it clear he was disappointed. And he stayed with you anyway. He did. He said he fell in love with who I was becoming, not who I'd been at my worst. But he also said I couldn't become that person fully until I dealt with the worst thing I'd done. He was right. Reba set her mug down with deliberate care. Tell me about 2003. Not the sanitized version in your letter, but the actual experience. I want to understand what was happening in your life that made sabotaging my opportunity seem like a reasonable choice. Trisha's face showed a flash of something. Relief, maybe, at being asked to explain rather than immediately condemned. I'd released Inside Out the year before, and it had underperformed. Not a disaster, but not the commercial success my previous albums had been. Radio was already starting to shift younger, and I was 38, watching 23-year-olds get the promotional push I remembered having a decade earlier. My marriage to Robert was disintegrating. He was having an affair with his assistant, which I knew but couldn't acknowledge publicly without looking weak. She paused, gathering herself. I'd started taking Ambien to sleep, then Adderall to wake up and function, then Xanax to manage the anxiety the Adderall created. My doctor was happy to prescribe because I was a functional addict, still performing, still meeting obligations, still maintaining the appearance of having everything together. No one knew I was falling apart except Robert, and he was too busy with his own dysfunction to care. And the movie role? When did that enter the picture? February 2003. My agent called about The Road Home, said the producers were interested. I read the script, and it was perfect. This character who'd sacrificed everything for her career and had to confront whether it was worth it. I saw myself in her, saw the opportunity to do something that might revitalize my career and give me purpose beyond churning out albums for diminishing returns. Trisha stood, needing movement. She walked to the French doors and stared out at the Tennessee landscape, her back to Reba, but I was terrified. Terrified I'd fail, that I'd be exposed as someone whose talent didn't translate beyond music, that the industry would point to my movie failure as proof I was past my prime. So I turned it down, told my agent the timing was wrong, that I needed to focus on my marriage and music. And then they offered it to me. Yes. And when my agent mentioned it casually, they're going with Reba McEntire instead, something broke. I realized I'd made a mistake turning it down, but instead of accepting that, instead of calling them back and saying I'd reconsidered, I decided to take the opportunity away from you too. Trisha turned back to face Reba, and her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying yet, holding tears at bay through visible effort. I told myself it was survival, that in the music industry women compete for scraps while men get the whole table, so taking you down was just playing the game by its actual rules, rather than the fake ones about sisterhood and support. I told myself you'd be fine, that you had your sitcom and touring and didn't need this movie the way I needed it. Except you'd already turned it down, Reba said, and her voice carried an edge now. So you weren't protecting your own opportunity. You were just destroying mine out of spite. Yes. The word was simple, undefended. That's exactly what I did. And after I called Marcus Chen and lied about you, after I hung up the phone knowing I'd sabotaged you, I felt sick, literally sick. I went to the bathroom and threw up. But I didn't call him back, didn't confess or try to undo it. I just let it stand. Reba stood as well, the kitchen island between them like a barrier or a safety zone. Do you know what the worst part is? Not that you cost me the role, though that hurts. Not even that you lied about me to the producer. The worst part is that you let me think our friendship ended because of something I did. That you let me spend 15 years occasionally wondering if I'd said something offensive, if I'd been a bad friend, if there was some deficiency in me that had caused you to pull away. I know. Trisha's voice was barely above a whisper. No, I don't think you do, because you've spent 15 years knowing exactly why things ended. You had information, context, understanding. I had nothing except the feeling of being discarded without explanation. Do you have any idea how many times I almost reached out? How many emails I drafted and deleted because I didn't want to seem desperate or needy? The anger Reba had been holding in check was rising now, fueled by the recognition of exactly how much emotional labor Trisha's silence had cost her. I looked for answers in everything, analyzed my behavior at industry events, wondered if I'd been too successful and you resented it, if I'd been too supportive and you found it condescending. I second-guessed myself for years because you couldn't be bothered to tell me the truth. You're right, Trisha said, and tears were falling now, unchecked. You're absolutely right. I was selfish and cruel, and I took the coward's way out at every opportunity, and I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. That sorry doesn't undo 15 years of hurt and confusion, but it's the only thing I have to offer. Reba's own eyes were wet now, too. Anger and hurt and exhaustion combining into something that felt too large for the carefully appointed kitchen to contain. What did you think would happen when you sent that letter? That I'd read it and immediately forgive you? That we'd have tea and talk it through and everything would be fine? No, I thought you'd probably never speak to me again. Hoped you might eventually understand why I'd done it, even if you couldn't forgive me. But mostly, I just needed you to know the truth, because carrying the lie had become impossible. So this was for you, unburdening yourself to make your conscience feel better. Trisha flinched but didn't deny it. Partly, yes, but also because you deserve to know. Because false narratives are their own kind of violation. Because I'd taken enough from you without also stealing your right to understand your own history. Silence settled between them, heavy with everything that had been said and everything that remained unsaid. Reba walked to the French doors and looked out at the view that money and success had purchased for Trisha. Beautiful, isolated, carefully maintained. She thought about her own home in Belle Meade, equally beautiful and equally isolated. Both of them living in spaces that proclaimed achievement while sometimes feeling like very expensive containers for loneliness. I believed in you, Reba said finally, her voice quiet but carrying clearly in the kitchen's acoustics. And when you were fighting for recognition, when radio wouldn't play your singles, when the industry was telling you to be more commercial or give up, I believed in you. I promoted your music in interviews, recommended you to producers, tried to use whatever platform I had to help another woman succeed in a system designed to let one of us win at most. I know. That's what makes it worse. And when you got your breakthrough, when She's in Love with the Boy hit #1 and suddenly you were everywhere, I was genuinely happy for you. Not performing happiness for cameras, not strategic friendship to maintain industry connections. Real happiness, because I thought we were friends. Because I thought your success was our success. women proving we could all thrive without destroying each other. Reba turned to face Trisha directly. So when you sabotaged me, you weren't just taking away a role. You were destroying the narrative I'd built about female friendship and solidarity. You were proving that maybe the industry cynics were right, that women can't truly support each other because we're all competing for the same limited space. That's not true, Trisha said urgently. The problem wasn't female friendship. The problem was me. My weakness, my fear, my inability to handle pressure without lashing out. Other women in this industry managed to support each other without sabotage. I failed at it spectacularly. And now you want absolution. No, I want you to have the truth. What you do with it is entirely up to you. Reba studied Trisha's face, looking for deception or manipulation and finding only exhaustion. The woman standing across from her looked genuinely depleted, wrung out by 15 years of carrying guilt and the final effort of confession. Whatever else Trisha Yearwood was, ambitious, talented, complicated, she appeared to be genuinely sorry. The question was whether that mattered. Whether being sorry was sufficient. Whether understanding someone's pain excused the harm they'd caused. Whether forgiveness was something Reba could offer, even if Trisha deserved it. I need to know something, Reba said. If Marcus Chen called you tomorrow and offered you another role, another chance at the film career you wanted, and getting it meant making me look bad, would you do it again? Trisha's response was immediate. No, never. I'd turn it down before even considering anything that might hurt you. Because you learned better, or because you're afraid of consequences now? Both, honestly. I learned that success built on other people's sabotaged opportunities doesn't feel like success. But I'm also afraid of losing Garth, losing the respect of people I care about, losing whatever credibility I've rebuilt. I'm not going to pretend I'm purely reformed. I'm still selfish enough to want to protect what I have now. At least you're honest about that. Trisha smiled slightly, bitter and self-aware. 15 years of therapy teaches you that dishonest self-flagellation is just another form of manipulation. If I told you I was completely transformed and would never make a self-serving choice again, you'd know I was lying. Reba found herself almost smiling despite everything. That was the Trisha she remembered, sharp, self-deprecating, unwilling to perform purity she didn't feel. Maybe that person had always been there, just buried under desperation and medication, and the soul-crushing pressure of maintaining relevance in an industry that consumed and discarded artists with industrial efficiency. I can't forgive you right now, Reba said clearly. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully forgive you. But I can acknowledge that I understand why you did it, even though understanding doesn't equal excusing. That's more than I deserve. Probably. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to think about this. Really think about it. Without the pressure of immediate response or public performance. And in a few weeks, or maybe months, I'll decide what kind of relationship, if any, I want to have with you going forward. That might mean we never speak again. It might mean we eventually rebuild some version of friendship. I honestly don't know yet. That's fair. And in the meantime, I need you to not talk about this publicly. Not to leverage confession into publicity, not to frame yourself as the brave truth-teller who risked everything for honesty. This stays between us until I decide if and how it becomes part of any larger conversation. Agreed. Absolutely. Reba walked back to the kitchen island and picked up her purse, the conversation feeling complete even though nothing had been resolved. I'm going to leave now. Thank you for the tea and for being honest, even though your honesty came about 13 years too late. Reba, Trisha's voice stopped her at the doorway. For what it's worth, I'm proud of everything you've accomplished. Not just the career stuff, but the way you've moved through this industry with integrity. You deserve better from me, and I'm sorry I couldn't give it to you when it mattered." Reba nodded once, not trusting her voice to remain steady if she tried to speak. She walked through the beautiful home to the front door, aware of Trisha following at a respectful distance, neither of them attempting the kind of hug or physical comfort that would have felt false given the conversation's weight. The Tennessee afternoon was bright and warm, late spring moving toward summer, the kind of day that promised renewal and growth. Reba got in her Range Rover and drove back toward Nashville, her mind churning through everything that had been said and everything she still needed to process. By the time she reached her Belle Meade home, the sun was beginning its descent toward evening. Reba's phone showed new messages, from Linda requesting callback, from friends checking in, from her publicist asking about tomorrow's schedule. She ignored all of them, carrying the weight of the afternoon's confrontation inside, like something precious and fragile that required careful handling. She poured herself a real drink this time, bourbon, neat, the kind of Nashville cliché that felt appropriate given the day's emotional excess. Settled into her living room with the awards she'd accumulated across 4 decades, Reba thought about forgiveness and betrayal and the complicated reality that people could be genuinely sorry while still having caused genuine harm. She thought about Trisha at 38, terrified and medicated and convinced that her window of opportunity was closing. Thought about herself at various career crossroads, the choices she'd made that hurt other people even when she'd meant well. Thought about the music industry's machinery that pitted women against each other and then condemned them for the competition it had manufactured. And she thought about what came next, not just with Trisha, but with her own story, her own narrative, her own understanding of how success had been built and what it had cost. The bourbon went down smooth, warmth spreading through her chest like permission to feel everything she'd been holding back. Tomorrow would bring decisions and consequences, and the careful work of figuring out what accountability looked like when both parties were human and flawed and trying their best to navigate systems designed to crush the vulnerable. But tonight, Reba just sat with the complexity, letting it exist without resolution, accepting that some things didn't get tied up neatly, even when you desperately wanted closure. Her phone buzzed one more time. A text from Trisha, sent despite the agreement to give Reba space. "Thank you for coming today. Thank you for listening. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. T." Reba read it twice, then turned off her phone entirely. The world could wait. The industry could speculate. The resolution could remain suspended in possibility. For now, she just needed to sit with the truth and let it settle into something she could eventually carry forward. 3 months passed before Reba contacted Trisha again. 3 months of therapy sessions, where she unpacked betrayal and forgiveness with a counselor who specialized in trauma and relationships. 3 months of conversations with her sister Alice, who provided perspective uncontaminated by industry politics. 3 months of journals filled with angry letters she never sent, compassionate letters she wasn't ready to send, and eventually letters that approached something like understanding. The CMA Awards in November provided the inevitable collision point where their paths would cross professionally. Both were scheduled to attend. Reba was presenting Album of the Year. Trisha was performing a tribute to female country legends. The event would be broadcast live to millions, Nashville's annual display of its aristocracy, and everyone would be watching to see how Reba McEntire and Trisha Yearwood navigated the same space. Linda had called the week before the ceremony, voice tight with concern. "We need to talk about the CMAs. Specifically, we need to talk about how you're planning to handle the Trisha situation. Media is already asking questions. They noticed you haven't been photographed together since your anniversary show, and people are speculating." "Let them speculate," Reba had said. "I'll be professional. That's all anyone needs to know." Professional could mean a lot of things. Are we talking polite distance, or are we talking genuine warmth? Because the difference will be analyzed and discussed for weeks. I don't know yet, Linda. I'll know when I see her. The night of the awards arrived with typical Nashville November weather, cold enough to require serious outerwear over the designer gowns, not quite cold enough to snow. Reba's stylist had chosen a stunning emerald dress that photographed beautifully, elegant without trying too hard, the kind of outfit that reminded everyone she'd been doing this longer than most current stars had been alive. Backstage at the Bridgestone Arena was controlled chaos as usual, performers running through final rehearsals, presenters being briefed by production staff, managers negotiating last-minute changes to running order. Reba found her dressing room and settled in for the hair and makeup that transformed her into the public version of herself. She'd been there about 20 minutes when the knock came. Firm, deliberate, the knock of someone who'd almost talked themselves out of showing up. "It's open," Reba called, though she already knew who it would be. Trisha entered hesitantly, dressed in rehearsal clothes rather than her performance outfit, minimal makeup, revealing the same exhaustion Reba had seen in Franklin. "I'm sorry to interrupt your prep. I know you're busy. But I wanted to say something before we're both in front of cameras and it becomes impossible to be real." Reba gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Sit." Trisha sat, hands folded in her lap like a student called to the principal's office. "I've respected your request for space. Haven't tried to contact you, haven't talked about our situation publicly, even when journalists have asked pointed questions. But tonight, we're going to be in the same building, possibly photographed together, and I wanted you to know, whatever you need from me, I'll provide. If you need me to avoid you entirely, I will. If you need public distance but private acknowledgement, I can do that. If you want to talk at some point during the evening, I'm available. Your comfort is the priority." Reba studied Trisha's face in the mirror's reflection. 3 months had changed things subtly. Trisha looked more settled somehow, less haunted than she'd been in May. "Are you okay?" The question surprised them both. "I'm better. Therapy helps. Garth helps. Having finally told you the truth helps, even though I know it hurt you. I'm sleeping better than I have in years, which sounds absurd, given that I probably destroyed one of the most important friendships I've ever had. Honesty has that effect sometimes. Immediate pain, eventual relief. How are you, really?" Reba turned from the mirror to face Trisha directly. "I'm angry still. Some days more than others. I've had to completely rewrite my understanding of 2003, of our friendship, of how things ended. That's been harder than I expected. Turns out I'd built a whole narrative around that period of my life, and finding out it was based on incomplete information means reassessing everything. I'm sorry, I know I keep saying that, but it's all you can say." "I know." Reba took a breath. "I've been thinking a lot about what forgiveness means, whether it's something you grant to make the other person feel better or something you do for yourself to stop carrying poison. My therapist has opinions about this, whole theories about radical acceptance and releasing resentment. And what do you think?" "I think forgiveness isn't one decision. It's a series of choices you make repeatedly. Some days I wake up and I've forgiven you. Other days the anger is fresh and raw, and I'm back to feeling betrayed. Maybe eventually one of those responses will win out permanently, or maybe I'll spend the rest of my life fluctuating between understanding and hurt." Trisha nodded and her eyes were wet again. "That's fair. That's more than fair. But here's what I know for certain. What you did doesn't get to define the rest of my life. I won't let your 15-year-old mistake continue stealing from me. So I'm choosing to move forward, even though I don't know exactly what that looks like yet. What do you need from me to make that possible?" Reba considered. "Patience. Space when I need it, presence when I'm ready for it, and complete honesty going forward. No more secrets, no more protecting me from uncomfortable truths you think I can't handle. If we're going to have any kind of relationship again, even just cordial professionalism, it has to be built on actual transparency." "Done." Absolutely. Trisha paused. Can I tell you something? About that day you came to Franklin? Go ahead. After you left, I sat in that kitchen for 2 hours, just processing. And I realized that for 15 years, I'd been living in fear of your reaction, constructing elaborate scenarios of your anger, your hurt, your rejection. And the actual conversation, as difficult as it was, wasn't as devastating as I'd imagined. Not because you weren't hurt, you clearly were, but because you were human about it. You didn't perform anger for dramatic effect, didn't try to wound me the way I'd wounded you. You just told me the truth about how it felt, and that was somehow worse and better than anything I'd anticipated. I thought about revenge, Reba admitted. About leaking the story to CMT or Billboard, letting public opinion destroy you the way you'd tried to destroy my opportunity. But that felt hollow, like it would hurt you without actually healing me. Thank you for that, for choosing the harder path. Someone knocked on the dressing room door, production assistant with the 5-minute warning. Both women stood, the conversation reaching its natural endpoint. Tonight, I'm going to be professional and cordial, Reba said. If we're photographed together, I'll smile like we're friendly acquaintances, not best friends, not enemies. Just two people who've been in the industry a long time and understand how these events work. That's more than I deserve. Probably. But I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me, because I don't want to spend tonight performing anger or hurt or any emotion for public consumption. I want to enjoy presenting an award and celebrating country music without your mistake being the thing everyone's talking about tomorrow. Makes sense. Trisha moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Your performance at the anniversary show, the things you said about accountability and forgiveness, that was masterful. You took the most painful moment and transformed it into something meaningful. That's art, Reba. Real art. After Trisha left, Reba returned to the mirror where her stylist was waiting to finish her look. The woman said nothing about the conversation she'd definitely overheard. Nashville ran on discretion as much as gossip, and professionals knew when to keep their mouths shut. The awards ceremony unfolded with typical Music Row precision. Performances timed to the second, commercial breaks calibrated perfectly, speeches edited for length before winners even reached the podium. Reba presented Album of the Year with grace and humor, her remarks praising the nominees while gently roasting the industry's tendency to ignore artists over 40. Trisha's tribute to female country legends was stunning. A medley that moved from Patsy Cline through Loretta Lynn to contemporary stars, her voice rich and controlled even while navigating rapid stylistic shifts. The standing ovation lasted nearly a minute, industry recognition of talent that had persisted through trend cycles and format changes, and all the machinery designed to make artists obsolete. During the commercial break following Trisha's performance, they ended up backstage at the same moment, both heading to different destinations but crossing paths in the narrow hallway. Cameras were present but not yet filming. Production staff focused on the next segment. "Beautiful performance," Reba said, and meant it. "Thank you. Your presentation was perfect. That line about the industry discovering women every 5 years, like we're new continents, was brilliant." They stood there for a moment, two legends of their format, survivors of decades in a business that had tried repeatedly to dismiss them. The history between them was complicated now, weighted with betrayal and confession and the uncertain work of potential reconciliation. But they were also peers who understood things about each other that outsiders couldn't access: the specific exhaustion of maintaining fame, the constant negotiation between authenticity and performance, the loneliness that came with success that looked effortless but required constant vigilance. "Maybe we could have coffee sometime," Reba heard herself say. "Not immediately, not next week, but eventually, when it feels less raw." Trisha's face showed surprise. and something like hope. I'd like that. Whenever you're ready, just let me know. It doesn't mean everything's fine. Doesn't mean we're back to being friends or that I've completely forgiven you. It just means I'm willing to see if there's anything salvageable from what we used to have. That's enough, more than enough. The production assistant called Reba's name. Time to move to the next position, the show continuing its relentless forward momentum. She nodded at Trisha once more, then walked toward her next obligation, feeling something shift inside that she couldn't quite name. The after-party was held at the Omni Hotel, Nashville's industry gathering in expensive ballrooms with open bars and carefully curated guest lists. Reba made her required appearances, thanked sponsors, congratulated winners, posed for photos that would appear in trade publications. But she left earlier than usual, tired from the emotional labor of navigating the evening while carrying the weight of everything unresolved with Trisha. At home, she poured another bourbon and sat in her living room, phone showing messages of congratulations and industry gossip. One text stood out, sent an hour ago from Trisha. "Thank you for tonight. For being gracious when you could have been cruel. For leaving the door open even a crack. I know I have years of earning back trust ahead, if that's even possible. But I'm grateful for the chance to try. Sleep well. T." Reba read it several times, examining her own reaction. The anger was still present, but quieter now, sharing space with something else, not forgiveness exactly, but the recognition that healing was possible even when restoration wasn't guaranteed. She typed a response, deleted it, typed again. "Coffee in January. We'll see where things go from there." She hit send before she could reconsider, then set the phone aside and let the bourbon's warmth spread through her exhaustion. January was 2 months away. 2 months to continue therapy, continue processing, continue the slow work of deciding what kind of relationship, if any, she wanted with the woman who'd betrayed her and finally confessed. 2 months to sit with uncertainty rather than rushing toward resolution that might be false or premature. Outside her window, Nashville's lights glittered against the night sky, the city that had made her and broken her, and made her again, continuing its constant churn of ambition and creation and destruction. Somewhere across town, Trisha was probably sitting with similar complexity, navigating similar uncertainty. And maybe that was okay. Maybe some hurts didn't heal cleanly. Some friendships didn't rebuild to their original specifications. Some forgiveness remained partial and contingent and sufficient anyway. Reba finished her bourbon and headed to bed, feeling older and wiser and more uncertain than she'd been 6 months ago when Trisha's letter had arrived, but also feeling something she hadn't felt in 15 years when she thought about Trisha Yearwood. Honest. Finally, painfully, honestly aware of what had happened, why it had happened, and what it meant for everything that came next. She slept that night without the questions that had haunted her since 2003. In their place lived different questions, harder questions maybe, about accountability and grace, and the messy work of deciding who deserved second chances and under what conditions. But at least these were questions with answers she could pursue, rather than mysteries that left her spinning in confusion. And that, Reba thought as sleep finally claimed her, was its own kind of progress. The Grand Ole Opry stage would still be there tomorrow. The awards and achievements would still line her walls. The career would continue its forward momentum regardless of personal complications. But the space where Trisha Yearwood had lived in her understanding, that space had been rewritten, transformed from confusion into clarity, from mystery into complicated truth. What came next was up to both of them, and for the first time in months, Reba felt ready to find out.